From Whitney Media, 1460 WVOX, the Greenburgh Report with Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner. You can join in the conversation at 914-636-0110. Now on 1460 WVOX, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning. I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and today we have a very interesting program. My guest is Marjorie Shu, who's with the Asian American Advisory Board. Westchester has a large Asian population, and many people across the country who are Asian have been victims of discrimination, violence, and hate. So thank you so much for joining us, and maybe you could tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show. We have lived in Sleepy Hollow for the last almost 9 years, and in spring of 2021, our county executive, George Latimer, asked me to chair the county's Asian American Advisory Board. Before then, I had been chair of the board for the Asian American Federation in New York City, so very familiar with the demographic and the challenges for the Pan-Asian community in the 5 boroughs. And then professionally, I spent my career in telecommunications. I was with Verizon, and then I took an opportunity in Singapore as their chief technology officer for Singtel. And now I primarily work with startups and do advisory for telecommunications and early stage technology companies, and also sit on a number of not-for-profit boards.
Well, you mentioned that you spent some time in Singapore. Did you grow up in the United States or in Asia?
I actually, I was born in Taipei, Taiwan, and my father was with the Taiwanese Foreign Service. So I came to this country when I was 6 months old. We lived in Chicago, and I grew up primarily in the Northeast. I'm a Jersey girl, and so going to Singapore to work for a large multinational company was very eye-opening as really a Chinese American in Southeast Asia.
Do you still have family in Taiwan?
I do. I have an uncle and some cousins, and I hope to get back there soon now that we're past the pandemic.
Are many Taiwanese, really nervous about what's happening with China? What's your feeling about that?
That's a really interesting question. My father just returned after spending 3 months in Taiwan, and I asked him that exact same question. And amongst his friends and, very old schoolmates and family, they're just living life, and they're not particularly as anxious as we are for them. I think it's similar to how the rest of the world perceives the U.S. and gun violence, that when I was in Singapore, people, my assistant thought, everyone in America carries a gun and it's all about, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But, we go about our daily lives without that, that trepidation. So I think it's kind of analogous to, the situation in Taiwan with China, doing their aggressive military maneuvers, but they're still going about their lives in a very peaceful manner. But of course, the Taiwanese government is, girding themselves for possible actions. Right.
Nobody thought Russia would invade Ukraine.
Right. So tragic. Yes.
You never know. In terms of anti-American, anti-Asian, violence, I know that it's prevalent all over the world. Have you experienced hate crimes in Westchester County?
I personally,
or has the community experienced?
Yeah, I personally have not, but there were two very public attacks in Westchester, both of them against senior women, which is really tragic. That our most vulnerable in the community are the ones that are the victims. It was actually the spring of 2021 when there was a Korean grandmother who was attacked in White Plains. That was what really motivated me to join the Asian American Advisory Board. And then again last year, again in the spring, there was a heinous hate crime perpetrated against a Filipino senior woman. And we were very glad that the Westchester District Attorney moved quickly on that crime, and that attacker was formally charged with a hate crime.
I remember shortly after the pandemic started, there was a lot of people were boycotting Chinese restaurants, and I had organized an effort in Hartsdale encouraging people to eat at the Chinese restaurants, but it seemed to me that everybody was victimizing people of Asian descent.
That's exactly right. The Asian community grappled with the dual epidemics, right? COVID and then the anti-Asian hate. And the Asian American communities in Chinatown, in Flushing, in Brooklyn, they were the first to experience the, hit on their revenues as people were not frequenting their businesses. So thank you for supporting our community and dispelling that falsehood that there was any danger of supporting Asian businesses. And
I remember, I think there were even some rallies in Westchester at that time that I attended. I think there were a few. One, I remember, I think in Scarsdale and in Ardsley.
Yes, exactly. There was one in Pleasantville. They were all over Westchester, and I was really gratified. The one in Ardsley was actually organized by the high school students, which was marvelous. So there has been an amazing solidarity and allyship in Westchester for the AAPI community. But unfortunately, nationally, the anti-Asian discrimination, hate incidents are not abating. And so the media cycles have moved on, but the hate against our API community continues and is just so shocking and sad.
And that really is a fantastic point. We have to take a break now, but when it's in the news, if there's a murder or something, everybody talks about it, but usually it's under the radar, but it's still happening.
Exactly.
So we're going to be right back in a couple minutes, and we're talking about the Asian American community and what we could do to prevent discrimination, hate, and racism. And my guest is Marjorie Shu, and she is with the Asian American Advisory Board. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor.
WVOX. Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
I feel it's almost like slavery where... Hi, I'm Paul Feiner. I'm Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and my guest is Marjorie Shu with the Asian American Advisory Board, and we've been talking about discrimination, hate, and racism, and what we could do as a community to to stop that, and maybe people could get along a little bit better or a lot better. I had a question. Right now in the news, there's so many stories about China harassing, the Pacific, countries, Taiwan, Japan, all over. Does that also create more hate against everybody? The Asian community. Does it have an impact? Does it have some sort of impact if there's anti-Chinese sentiment because of the Chinese government's provocations?
That's a really interesting question, Paul. In our country that is so polarized,
right,
amongst so many different factions, it seems like being anti-China is the one thing that all the partisan groups can somehow agree upon. So I think that does give people even more license to be anti-Asian, unfortunately. So
because people are not differentiating, people from one country to another, they're just assuming that everybody's Chinese.
Yes, exactly. And, I would imagine, people that are perpetrating the discrimination and the hate and the violence and the microaggressions, they're not being so nuanced to, try to differentiate across all the Asian ethnicities, of which there are so many. There's so many languages, there's so many dialects, and, it is a shame.
You mentioned earlier on the program that you were involved in New York City, mm-hmm. and now you're involved in Westchester. What's the difference between both groups and both communities?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. When County Executive Latimer asked me to co-chair the AAAB, as I like to refer to it, I said, I don't really know that much about Asians in Westchester County, and would you help us do a community needs assessment? So that was a big effort. Last year, we launched a survey of the AAPI community in Westchester so that we could all learn more about the needs. And so from that survey, which we're really gratified to have the support of the county executive and his staff, as well as Dr. Sheila Klatsky, who was our consultant who helped design and authored the report starting last summer. And then we launched the report in May this year during AAPI Heritage Month. And what we know is that Asians are the second fastest growing population in Westchester, whereas in the rest of the country, in New York City, in all of North America, and in New York State, Asians are actually the fastest growing demographic. So here in Westchester, we're second behind Hispanic population, which is the fastest growing between the two census, 2010 and 2020. So Asians are now 8% of Westchester County when you include multiracial. And the multiracial Asian Americans, people like my children who are half Chinese, grew by an astounding 61%. And this is at the same time where white Americans are declining. From 2010 to 2020, whites declined from 68% to 53%. So Westchester is on the brink of becoming a majority-minority community. And the difference between New York City and Westchester, one big difference is that in Westchester, South Asians, so Indians, Pakistani, they are the biggest ethnic group, making up 34% of the Asians in Westchester County, whereas in New York City, Chinese Americans are the largest Asian demographic. And then in Westchester, the East Asians are the ones that are fastest growing. So Chinese, Japanese, Korean. So those are some of the differences. And in Westchester County, 2/3 of Asian Americans are first generation, like myself. We were born in Asia and then came here sometime during our life.
It's also very interesting because I have an intern program and a lot of students, and I've noticed, and we also, at practically every town board meeting, we honor exceptional students, and a large percentage, probably a majority of the students that we've been recognizing have been Asian. And you know, I've said to somebody, it's so interesting because what I've seen, there's something about the culture where the parents really push their kids to be very, very successful. And, you know, so many of the students are really brilliant. You know, we had one student volunteer in my office in the spring, and he did an inventory of all the, and he was Chinese, and did an inventory of all the businesses in Greenburgh, came up with a list of all the vacancies. We put it on the town website. We're setting up a program where businesses that are small businesses could take advantage of student talent using social media. But I was just really impressed. What is it about the Asian community where so many of the young people are super high achievers?
Well,
much more than, I'd say, practically any other, you know, ethnic group.
Yeah. Well, just to share some data with you, Asian Americans do over-index the general population, both in terms of median income. So the median income for Asian Americans is $138,000 a year, whereas the general population is about $99,500 annually. And then also in terms of education, 72% of Asians have attained a bachelor's degree, whereas only 50% of the rest of the population. Asian Americans are also very entrepreneurial. So even though we're only 8% of the population, 11.1% of small businesses in Westchester are owned by Asian Americans, and we do have the lowest unemployment rate. So it is this kind of, those things definitely perpetuate the model minority myth. The problem with that is, it puts undue pressure on Asian Americans to achieve. So there's very high rates of, mental health and anxiety and stress amongst Asian American youth. And suicide is actually the highest cause of death amongst Asian American youth who feel this pressure. The other problem, well, there's a couple of problems. One, it becomes a wedge issue between Asian Americans and other communities of color, as we're kind of put on this pedestal to say, oh, look at, Asian Americans and their achievements. The other big problem is that it masks that there's a very large community, percentage of our community that are not only suffering from mental health problems, but also there's rising poverty for Asian Americans in Westchester County. So the poverty rate from over the 10 years climbed from 5.1% to 6.5%. So there's 4,000 Asian Americans that are living below the poverty line. And the problem is even more dire with seniors. So 11% of Asian American seniors are living in poverty, and that's the second highest poverty rate behind blacks and African Americans. The added problem to that is only 3.6% of Asian Americans are receiving SNAP benefits, so supplemental nutrition assistance, while, I just said six, so that's like half of the people that are living under the poverty rate. And then amongst seniors, because of language access, social isolation, they're not even getting access to Medicare and other social benefits that they have rights to. So it's a big problem that we're coming out of this needs assessment survey. We'd like to help solve some of these problems.
That's really interesting. So when I have a town board meeting and I'm honoring a student, they're driven, but I'm saying one part of the population. I also, somebody mentioned, say, the Jewish community, and I'm Jewish. The first generation or second generation Jewish people were very highly motivated, but as generations, pass on, and people become part of the American community, then it sort of normalizes, and they may not be as motivated, or say 50 years from now as people are now, and maybe just like. But it's just really amazing, because every meeting of the town board, people call me saying they want to make a presentation to the town board. And then, a day later, the parent says, could their son or daughter be recognized at a town board meeting? So I guess that puts the pressure on the young people to achieve.
Yeah.
And I never really thought that about the pressures and how it creates anxiety levels, because some of the students that we've honored are like 10 years old, 11 years old.
Yeah.
And they're like brilliant. They're smarter than I could ever be.
I doubt that's true. But there is a very strong focus on education. And I think, to your point, as far as the first generation being these overachievers, and second generation, maybe it carries over, and then people get Americanized and normalized. It's another reason we should be welcoming immigrants and migrants to our country, because they come to our country with this drive to succeed and this work ethic that, they're coming from such dire circumstances, and they're coming to achieve the American dream so that they can become, productive member of society.
Let's take another break.
1460 WVOX.
Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Hi, I'm Paul Feiner. I'm Greenburgh, Town Supervisor. And my guest is Marjorie Shu with the Asian American Advisory Board. If somebody is Asian American, they want to get involved in the community, how do they reach out to the advisory board? And are your meetings open? If people want to get active, what recommendations would you have?
Well, our meetings are open. They're the first Wednesday of every month. The county actually has lots of advisory boards for different affinity groups. So if you're interested in joining an advisory board, you should go on the county website. And we all serve upon appointment by the county executive. So George and his staff are the ones who review the resumes, vet the candidates, and ultimately our county executive appoints people to all these boards.
Are there any suggestions that you have for either the town or the county, what we could be doing that we're not doing to help the Asian American community?
Well, the findings coming out of our community needs survey is there's 6 major areas. The first that all governments, local as well as county, can help is do an inventory of all the services and the information that that are public facing. And what we found through the survey are there's so many Asian languages, but the ones that we really need to make sure information is available in is Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. The South Asian mostly are English proficient, but 25% of Westchester County Asians have limited English proficiency. So we really need to make all the services available to people in their language. The other challenge for our community is a sense of social isolation, as opposed to New York City, where you have Chinatown, Koreatown, and different, density of ethnic groups. Here, we're spread out all over the place, and so people feel socially isolated. There's only two kind of centers. One is Evergreen, which I'm sure you're well familiar with, where Chinese seniors gather, I think, weekly and do various activities. And then there's
at the Theater Young Community Center in Greenburgh.
Exactly.
I was actually going to mention that before.
Yeah. The other is the India Center in Hawthorne that does similar kind of gathering of people of Indian descent. And then there's various, language schools on Sundays that, we put our children in to learn our native mother language. And then there's mosques and temples and churches where people gather. But other than that, it's hard for us to find each other. So there is that social isolation that we need to think about how we can help facilitate.
An Evergreen Club is mainly seniors rather than younger Chinese.
Exactly.
But, I should mention one of the things that I'm really proud of, because we've had the Evergreen Club in the community center for probably over 25 years. But the Theater Young Community Center was known because it was predominantly an African-American community center. And I really thought that it was fantastic that the center and the community welcomed the Evergreen Club, because it really integrated the center, and it's really nice to see different ethnic groups
absolutely
welcoming each other and participating in activities together.
Well, we all have to embrace multiculturalism. That's the way our country, our county are going. Another finding in the survey, which was the biggest kind of learning for me, is that Asian Americans need more access to public transportation. So there's a lot of Korean seniors moving out of Queens into southern Westchester. So New Rochelle, Yonkers, Mount Vernon. We actually kind of over-indexed on Korean respondents to the survey, because a couple of my Asian American Advisory Board members and I went to a senior building on Neprin Ave and sat with Korean seniors so they can respond to the survey in Korean. They're looking for public transportation, but also grandparents living in Chappaqua and Scarsdale. Their adult children aren't home during the day to drive them around, so they feel very isolated in some of the northern suburbs.
So there's really inadequate routes, and when I actually got my start in public service as a citizen activist, I started the buses to New York City.
Oh, great!
And at that time you only had the trains, and the trains weren't running. And I organized. I rented 3 buses, and then basically the county started something. And then I went out of. I did it as a volunteer, but then I went out of business. But I really believe that there's a need for more public transportation all over, and that's really good.
Yeah,
a really good point.
Yeah. Asians are also looking for more culturally appropriate and language accessible medical and mental health care. We have very few practitioners that speak all the languages that Asian Americans do. So that is a particular focus for the county mental health commissioner, Michael Orth. And then there's a Chinese-Taiwanese American psychologist, Dr. Teresa Shuwackett, who is looking to create a center for AAPI community to get mental health and wellness and increase the education around behavioral health and destigmatize it. Asian Americans are also looking for.
So when you're talking about even mental health, if one of the problems is that there's such a pressure on young people to succeed, if you had psychologists and psychiatrists and mental health professionals who understand the culture, they might be able to do a better job treating people than, say, somebody who may not understand the underlying reasons.
Exactly. The underlying reasons as well as the cultural nuances of, our many countries. And so that's a big priority for us.
Do a lot of the parents ignore signs of depression among their kids, and do they basically, is it sort of like embarrassing and they're sort of afraid to go to a mental health professional because they're afraid that it's going to be a stigma on their families?
I think that's part of it. I think the other part is just not part of our lexicon. And, cultures that didn't grow up, seeking therapists and counselors, it's, just the signs are probably not even recognized. And talking with someone whose mother was saying that she was, having heart palpitations, and the daughter said, "Well, you're experiencing anxiety," and the mom was like, "No, I just have these my heart's beating fast." So it's not recognizing the signs in ourselves as well as our family members, and then not having, resources in Westchester to speak to about that. So we need a big education campaign and more research as well as more practitioners.
Oh, that's really interesting. I'm so glad I interviewed you. I'm learning a lot.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you helping us make this information more available. Another thing that people are looking for is for Asian American history to be included in public school curriculum. So we've talked with Senator Shelley Mayer, who chairs the Education Committee at the New York State Senate, as well as the regent on the Board of Regent. We had a panel discussion on May 22nd when we launched the findings of this report. We had the superintendent from the Ardsley School System, as well as an organization called Make Us Visible that's really pushing AAPI history into states. So it's been legislated in Connecticut, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Florida. So we want to make it part of the curriculum in New York State on a formal basis. They're already piloting and launching it in New York City. So there's plenty of curriculum material available. And so individual school systems can take the lead themselves and incorporate it into their curriculum, and it really is important. I'm hoping personally that more education will dispel and abate some of the anti-Asian hate and microaggressions and discrimination.
I was sort of thinking that during World War II, the Japanese who were in the United States, they were in camps. And does the United States, does the school systems highlight the discrimination that the American government, was sort of guilty of? Or do we sort of just overlook it or not give it enough, not give the abuses enough attention?
I've been out of school for a very long time, so I don't remember learning about the Japanese internment camps during World War II. I don't remember learning about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, where Chinese Americans were the first to be specifically prohibited from coming to this country as an ethnic group. So that is a unique, shame on our American government. But Asian Americans have been in the U.S. long before it was the U.S. Filipino fishermen were in Louisiana in the late 1500s. So we've been part of the fabric of America, and yet we're not sufficiently featured in our public school curriculum.
Right. I know in Westchester, David M. Moore was the first
historic
county legislator. You have Vikas Agarwal, who's a member of the Ardsley School Board. But you don't really have a lot of Asian Americans who are holding public office. And I'm wondering why you think that's happened. I'm sure it's going to start changing, but...
Well, I hope it starts changing sooner. I think Asian Americans need to engage at all levels of government. I think a bigger problem is Asian Americans have the lowest rate of voter registration as well as voting. So we don't have county data, but in terms of New York State, where the general public is registered at 62%, Asian Americans are only at 38.7%. And then in 2020, voting, the general public voted at 57%, which is still abysmally low, but Asian Americans only voted at 34.5%. But the good news is in 2020, there was a huge increase. Asian American voter turnout was the highest increase in the 2020 elections.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so we need more voters, and we do need more people serving in public office.
Great. We have to take one more break. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor. We'll be right back. And we're talking about the Asian American community in Westchester County. Thanks.
Now, back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Hi, I'm Paul Feiner. I'm Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and my guest is Marjorie Ashu of the Asian American Advisory Board. And the Asian community, a lot of people think it's Chinese or Indian, but the Asian community represents a lot of different ethnicities.
Yeah, we are certainly not a monolith. If you do a Google search, you'll see that there's maybe 15 major languages that Asian Americans speak, but the minor languages, if there is such a thing, is like 2,300 languages across all of Asia. So it makes it very difficult for governments to serve us, but I think that in Westchester, if we can get information and public services made available in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, that would be a huge step forward. I don't know if you know, Paul, but Greenburgh is 15.4% Asian American Pacific Islanders. So you have over 7,000 AAPI constituents in Greenburgh. So there's a lot of opportunity to bring folks together. Some of the other communities that are have a lot of Asians are Scarsdale, Ardsley, and then Yonkers actually has 13,000 AAPI living in that city.
Yeah, sort of also interesting because I know the Edgemont community and Ardsley community, very large Asian population. And do you find that people like to congregate and live next to people who have the same heritage that they do? Because I think, with especially Ardsley, it's such a welcoming, community. And I'm wondering if the word spreads to young people that, there's a family we should move to.
I think that's part of it. People are seeking community, and they want to raise their children amongst people that look like them and maybe speak similar languages. I think there's a lot of Japanese expats that are living in Harrison. The other big driver for Asians moving to community is good public school systems. So if you look at the communities where there's a lot of Asians, there's probably an excellent public school system.
When you're talking about like discrimination or hate or whatever, if you have, say, a school system and a lot of Asians and, Chinese, Indians, and the kids are excelling, does that create like a backlash among parents whose kids are not as smart? I mean, is that?
I'm sure it's unique to the particular school and the kids, and most importantly, the teachers and the and the administrators. One would hope that achievement, spurs everybody to study harder and be more competitive. College entrance is so competitive these days that people are, really have to work hard to be in the top 1% of their class. But I'm sure there is a degree of resentment and backlash, but I can't really quantify it.
Right. It's interesting because, again, when we started the program, we were talking about anti-Asian American violence in the United States, which I guess goes back to 1882 with the Chinese exclusion laws. I think we were the first U.S. immigration law that targeted a racial racial group. Do you deal with the Westchester Human Rights Commission?
Yes. Work very closely with Tejas Sanchala, who's the executive director of the Westchester County HRC. And in fact, in 2021, we worked closely with him and then my co-chair at the time, David Imamura, to pass the discriminatory harassment law, which makes it possible for the Human Rights Commission to file a lawsuit against a perpetrator of discrimination on behalf of the victim. So
have lawsuits actually been filed?
I don't know. I don't know if that's public information, honestly. But it's a very powerful tool that helps protect victims so that they don't have to be re-traumatized by doing those civil lawsuits or acting on their own behalf.
That's so interesting. In terms of the way people are treated, is there again any recommendations you have for Asians who feel that they're victims of discrimination? Should they first contact your board or should they first go to the Human Rights Commission?
Well, depending on the level of crime or incident, I definitely would encourage people to report it to the Human Rights Commission at Westchester County. They also can report it to their local police department as well as to the Westchester County District Attorney's Office. It's important for people to know that they're not alone in this struggle, and they should most certainly reach out to the Human Rights Commission.
Does social media have a negative impact because there's so much hate on social media, and has that become sort of a problem?
I certainly think that a lot of society's challenges and problems today are caused by social media, where people are in their own echo chamber, buying into misinformation and disinformation. And so that is certainly very dangerous. And I think it's been harmful to the mental health of our youth who have grown up with, cell phones in their pockets and the World Wide Web, always available. And unfortunately, instead of mining all the vast information that's helpful to our society, there's just so much negativity and polarization on our social media.
You were involved in New York City, now in Westchester. Is there anything that New York State could be doing that they're not doing?
Well, I'm really gratified that New York State has created a fund of $30 million specifically for AAPI nonprofits. So David and Mamora and I have been talking with the OCA in Westchester Hudson Valley to see how we apply for some of that grant money. In Westchester, we don't really have any social services nonprofits that are focused on AAPI community. So that would be really helpful if we did have more social services support. As mentioned, we're trying to create a mental health and wellness center that's more culturally appropriate in Westchester County. But the most important thing is language access. If nationally we have this epidemic of loneliness and social isolation. So imagine if you're a new immigrant and you can't even find any information in your language, during the pandemic to apply for the pandemic relief or to, find out where to get a vaccination. But just the most basic things of finding a job and finding resources and social services. I live in Sleepy Hollow, as I mentioned to you, Paul, and during the pandemic, there were community members in our majority Hispanic community that didn't have devices for their kids to dial in for remote schooling. So needing to drop off Wi-Fi hotspots as well as Chromebooks. And so there's huge disparity in our community. And our hope is that as we solve some of these issues for the AAPI community, we're also helping lift up all disadvantaged communities.
That is, that's great. Is there a large number of people from Asia coming to the United States? I know we have a large Asian population, but I'm wondering if it's growing.
It absolutely is growing. Between 2010 and 2020, Asians are the fastest growing ethnic group in New York State, in New York City, in the U.S., and in Canada. So all of North America, Asians are the fastest growing demographic.
Right. So does your committee also assist new immigrants?
We are certainly available as a resource. We don't, we don't have, as I said, like social services nonprofits, but we work with happy to work with you or the larger population and other nonprofits to support migrants coming to Westchester.
Unfortunately, we ran out of time, but I want to thank you very much for joining us. Is there a website for the Asian American Advisory Board?
There is. Thank you for asking. It's asianamerican.westchestergov.com/advisory-board. So all of our reports and the board members and all the information is there.
Thank you. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor. Speak to everybody next week. Thanks.